So it was about behavioural response in part. It wasn't just about the fiscal support for the sector.
Wah, 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 wah. Yes, that's the moment when our Prime Minister's mind heard the toilet flush in the background, when the topic of his Eat Out to Help Out scheme was put under scrutiny in the COVID inquiry, where he clearly tells us the reason for doing it.
You presented your plan for jobs to the Cabinet, and Mr Hancock said in evidence, when he gave evidence on the 30th of November, that it was at that Cabinet meeting on the 8th of July that he heard about the Eat Out to Help Out scheme for the first time. The scheme was announced, you'll recall, on the same day, the 8th of July, as part of the plan for jobs. Given that the Eat Out to Help Out scheme encouraged the coming together of different households in indoor spaces, which it did, of course, in restaurants, why was that plan not put by the Treasury in front of SAGE, in front of the Secretary of State for Health, and or the Chief Medical Officer for their consideration of the very same issue of the absolute risk of transmission?
So the first thing to say is why do Eat Out to Help Out at all?
No, please. There is a method to my madness. I'm asking you why, in light of the obvious issue of risk of transmission inherent in any scheme that encouraged households to come together, did the Treasury not consult with SAGE, the CMO, the Secretary of State for Health, or anybody else outside number 10?
Because Eat Out to Help Out had been designed specifically in the context of the safe lifting of MPIs.
So our Prime Minister basically is saying that it was about recruitment, as best as I can understand. Oh, I tried to find what the term MPIs actually means, and I saw a couple of quotes like multidimensional poverty index or multidimensional prognostic index. And I also saw the term MPIs when it came to recruitment. And judging by our Rishi Shortpants cross-examination during the day, he kept saying he made suggestions based on the economy, so I get the feeling he's on about recruitment. But do carry on with your method of madness, Hugo Keith.
That had already been signed off, as we talked about before, as part of the May plan, which had reopened hospitality, indoor hospitality. That had already been part of the approved May plan. Eat Out to Help Out only operated within that context, and indeed there were a significant range of other MPIs that were in place, including social distancing, COVID secure guidance, table service, contactless ordering, one-way systems, all of which had been put in place. But the overall reopening of indoor hospitality had already been implemented and, as we discussed before, modelled and all the rest of it, and involved scientists in that. And Eat Out to Help Out was designed to operate within that context of the safe lifting of MPIs. It didn't do anything further than that. This was a micro policy to make sure that that capacity, which the scientists had already said was part of an overall package which could be safely delivered, was actually used. And it was done very much in that context. And in the same way that other economic decisions like a VAT cut for hospitality or a stamp duty cut or indeed furlough or anything else or grants for the hospitality industry wouldn't ordinarily be cleared with medical advisors, nor was this, because we had already made the collective decision to reopen indoor hospitality, and this was a policy that sat within and beneath that.
In addition to the obvious economic policy, which was to encourage consumption in the hospitality sector, to encourage people to use restaurants and to preserve the jobs of women and the lower paid and individuals from minority ethnic backgrounds in the hospitality sector. It's obvious that the plan was designed with a meritorious consideration in mind. But it was also part of that plan, was it not, to address what you had called the fear, the fact that data showed that our country was far and away the least likely to get back to normal, and to promote what you've described in your Spectator article as an optimistic counter-narrative. You wanted to bring about a change in behaviour, to encourage people, more people than had previously gone to restaurants the previous year, to encourage people to come together. That was part of the policy objective, was it not?
I think as you're describing it, they're one and the same. My primary concern was protecting millions of jobs of particularly vulnerable people.
So his primary interest was protecting the jobs of millions of vulnerable people. Carry on, Dr. Death. I mean, Prime Minister.
Now, on the question of impact, it is absolutely right that you make plain that whilst there is some slim evidence to suggest that there was a correlation between the take-up of the scheme and new cases of COVID, there is other evidence, primarily in fact a paper prepared by HMRC, to suggest that there was no correlation. Some local authorities with very high eat out to help out take-up had relatively low levels of new COVID cases. Some other local authorities with high take-up had higher take-up of the COVID virus. So the evidence doesn't significantly support the proposition that there was an impact on infection rates. Nevertheless, why was the scheme not extended?
Because it was always designed to be temporary.
A submission from HM Revenue and Customs titled Eat Out to Help Out Extension, dated the 26th of August, said, "This is a submission concerning the possible extension of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. There have been some concerns that opening up the hospitality sector has contributed to the rising rate of infection that have led to local lockdowns." So was one issue, one concern, at the time that debate was had around the extension, that there was in fact, or might have been, an impact on infection rates?
No, the primary motivation was that it was meant to be a temporary intervention, because in order to elicit, and this is standard economic policy, in order to elicit a behavioural response, by definition what you want is for something to be temporary and credibly temporary, because otherwise you don't elicit the behavioural response that you are hoping to achieve. And as a general rule, the Treasury was always wary, as it should be, of temporary things that cost money becoming permanent, because that comes with significant fiscal implications. So the idea was very clearly to have something that was temporary to elicit the behavioural response, and that was always meant to be the case.
So it was about behavioural response in part. It wasn't just about the fiscal support for the sector.
Wah, 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 wah. Oops. Cue the excuses from Mr. I only made economical suggestions during meetings and did my best to hide my Eat Out to Help Out scheme from experts who would have told me quite clearly this is a very bad and stupid idea.
You've just said.
I mean, that's exactly right, because in order to safeguard the jobs of 2 million people working in the sector, you need people to go and use those businesses. And all the evidence analysis and general view of everyone was that it was unlikely that that was to happen, because people were not likely to return to those old behaviours, and this was designed to help encourage them to do so in a safe way. I mean, that is the explicit purpose of it. You can't safeguard those jobs without people being at the businesses so that they have the money to keep those jobs and employ those people. That's the whole point.
Fantastic excuse, Dr. Death. If that was the case, why didn't you seriously do a far-out and daring idea that might grab the nation's imagination, like takeaways? Or not many donors who own takeaways. Oh, sorry. But before you go, here's a little clip of how seriously he really takes this inquiry. More importantly, those whose loved ones died because of his Eat Out to Help Out scheme that he did his absolute best to hide from experts.
Are you aware that the Secretary of State for Health, who, by your own word, didn't know in advance of the Cabinet meeting, the 8th of July, of the promulgation of the scheme, express concerns latterly to your department about the risk of transmission?
No, I'm not sure I have any record of that, but I do know he has said that there has been undue focus on this one item and is evidence to the inquiry.
Excuse me? You're suggesting that he said this isn't a matter of some importance?
I think he said himself that there's been undue focus on this one item, was his words to the inquiry, and he certainly, I have no recollection of him raising that, nor do I have any record of him doing so with me at the time.
Well, it's a matter for my lady, but matters as to whether or not they are of importance this inquiry are for this inquiry.
Yes, my selective memory cannot recall our Hat Mancock saying what an absolute stupid idea it was. But I remember him saying that there's undue focus on a scheme that probably helped spread COVID and cause more deaths. The absolute arrogance of the man there. Dr. Death is a name that is duly deserved for our Prime Minister, don't you think? Let me know down below and I shall bid you farewell and take care, my friends.